Daf Kuf Hey Amid Aleph will begin Kuf Dalin Amid Beis right at the bottom. Tanan Niskavan Lichte Oisachas, if a person initially intended to write one letter, Vol be Stein, but he ended up writing two letters, then he's chayiv. He's chayiv because Lamaise he wrote two letters. In fact, the Gemara about Tanan Potter, we learned in the Mishnah that the person is Potter. Loikasha on the boy is Yuna. The loy boy is a yuna. It's a difference if the letters that he ended up, the two letters that he wrote, if they still require to put the tagim on it, the ziyuna, the tag, the crowns on it, or not. So, for instance, let's say a person intended to write the letter ches, but he ended up writing two letters to Ois of Zion. So he ended up writing two letters. Now, if he put the crowns on them, so then he has two complete Zions. He's chayiv for writing two Oisias. Where we say his potter is if they're still missing the crowns. So the letters that require the crowns, and he wanted to write the letters with the crowns, and he didn't, then it's missing the crowns, then he's potter. But if he wrote two Zions with the tagin, with the crowns, Lamaise ended up writing two complete letters, and for that he's chayiv. If a person wrote one letter with a nitrikan, Rashi Tevis, an abbreviation, that's machlokes. So machlokes is if we say that for writing a nitrikan, Rashi Tevis, so Lamaise he didn't end up writing two letters, but it has an interpretation, it's understood as meaning more than one, as meaning two or more. Is he chayiv for that or not? Rav Shuvim Seir is mechayiv chacham paijim. Where do we say these nitrika and Rashi Teves minatayr? Where do we see that from the Torah, that the Torah makes a reference and writes a letter that we can infer from this word, we can infer from these letters other interpretations. Shenemar ki av hamoin goyim nesatich. That Avram Avinu, Rabbeinu Shalom says, I made you a father of a multitude of nations. So we darshan Rashi Teves. Av is Aleph is Av nesatich al umeis. I made you a father to the nations, and the base is Bocher nesatich al umeis. I made you the chosen one from the nations. So that's the Rashi Tevis of Hamayin. The Rashi Tevis of Hamayin, the Hey Mem Vav Nun, is Hey and Ches. These letters are frequently interchangeable. So Hamayin, the Hey is Choviv Nasriach Lumeis. I made you beloved amongst the nations. Then the Mem is Melech Nesatich Lumeis. I made you king over the nations. Vosig Nesatich Lumeis. I made you a Choshev, a distinguished one among the nations. And the Nun is Nemen Nesatich Lumeis. I made you trusted to the Umeis. Rav Yechon Didei Amar. Rav Yechon gave his own example of Nitrikan. Anoichi in the Aseret Dibros, the word Anoichi Nitrikan, we darshan the Anoichi, the Aleph is, we darshan Aleph is Ona, the Nun is Nashi, and the Chof is Ksivas, and the Yud is Yehavius. That the Rabbeinu Shem says, I myself wrote and gave the Torah. Rabbanan Amru Amira Ne'ima Ksive Hiva. The darshan a different way is that the pleasant statement was written and given. Igadamri, Anoich Lemafreya, that we darshan the Anoichi from back to front, Lemafreya. So we darshan it from first to Yud, is Yehiva, Ksiva, Ne'amonim Amareha. That it was given in writing, and it was reliable, and Yehiva, Ksiva, it was given in writing, Ne'amonim, reliable, Amoreha, its statements. The Be'er bin Nosson Amre, they give another example of Nitrikan, Ki Yarda Derech Lenegdi. In the Maisa of Bilam and the Chamor, Bilam was hitting his donkey, and the Malach gave him Musar for doing that, and he said, why are you hitting the donkey? Ki Yorat Hane Aderech Lenegdi. that you went quickly on this road, which is a road which opposes me, which is lenegdi. And we darshan the yorat is yora rasa notza, that the hamor was afraid. It saw Yora was afraid. Rasa it saw the malach, and notza it turned off the road. It turned to the side. So why are you hitting it? He was afraid because he saw the malach, he saw me, and he turned to the side. So why are you hitting it? The Bei Rabbi Shmuel Tana, they learned another example of the Nutrikin, Carmel, that the Pasuk says by the Minchas HaOmer that you bring it from the grain that is Carmel. What is Carmel? We darshan caramale, like, so to speak, like a stuffed pillow, that the grain is full and ripe. Caramale. It's a caramale. Rav Bar Yaakov Amar, he says another example is V'hu kilolani kil klolo nimratzis, that Dovid HaMelech said that Shimon ben Gera gave him a curse, a terrible curse. Akola klola nimratzis. We darshan nimratzis is nitrikin, and he said what he said with that klola is he called Dovid. He said a noyefu, he's a noyef, he's an eshasish. The mem is Moavi, he's a Moab. The Reish is Ritzeachu, he's a killer, he's a murderer, and Seir, he's an enemy, Toyeva, and he is abomination. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Omar, Manedaber umanet tzadik. The brothers of Yosef, then when they were found that they had the Gavia of Yosef, and they were accused of being Ganovim, so they said, Manedaber umanet tzadik. So they said that how can we justify ourselves? So we darshan that nitzdadik is nechayim enachnu. They said the nun is we are nechayim, we're upright. Tzadikim enachnu, we're tzadikim. The tes is tahir enachnu, we're pure, and the dalit is dakim enachnu, we're clean. Kedoshim enachnu, we're kadosh, we're holy. Sagt the Mishnah, is a person writes two letters with two halomas, meaning he wrote one letter on Shabbos. He realized that he wrote a letter that he was over, and then he wrote a second letter. So he wrote the two letter. A letter is b'shtei halomas. Or if you wrote one letter in the morning and the other letter, the second letter in the evening, Rabbi Gamliel says he's chayev, and the Chacham say you're potter. So the way we learn the Mishnah according to Rashi is there's two separate cases. He's kaisev shtei yosef b'shtei halomas. He wrote the first letter. He forgot that it was Shabbos. He wrote the first letter. After writing the first letter, he became aware that he did this avera, and then he wrote afterwards a second letter. So therefore, it breaks up the idea, the knowledge of that he wrote the letter breaks up the two ICs, and he doesn't have a share, so he's potter. Or if he writes one letter in the morning, other in the evening. So the way Rashi learns it is that it's assumed that he became aware of it. It's not that it's definitively an awareness. It's not that he was told that specifically, or we know that he was told specifically that he became aware with Shabbos and he wrote the letter. It's an assumed awareness. If he wrote at such a long period of time, such a large lapse of time, it's assumed that he had an awareness between the two letters. Taisus learns differently. Taisus learns that we can't assume it. It's also talking where we know that he became aware of the two. And the Chiddush is that nevertheless, Rabbi Gamliel says he's chayev, even though there was a yediyah and a large lapse of time, still Rabbi Gamliel says you're chayiv chamseir paichim. So the Gemara will explain why Rabbi Gamliel, what's machlekes is, why Rabbi Gamliel says you're chayiv. But my kamiflagi, what's the machlekes? Rabbi Gamliel Savri holds and Yediyah L'chatzi Shir. It's true that he became aware, but that Yediyah is not significant because there's an awareness, not that he's chayiv a korban. It's a chatzi shir. It's only one letter. If a person, for instance, ate 2 kazayis chelev, he won 1 kazayis. He became aware that he ate the kazayis and he ate a second kazayis, so that Yediyah separates the two. They're considered 2 halomas, he's chayiv 2 korbanos. It breaks the two together. But this Yediyah is not significant. It's a Yediyah, a knowledge that he wrote 1 letter. Well, 1 letter is not mechayiv in a korban. So therefore, it does not split up. It does not break up the 2 letters. It's not considered a yediyah. Rabbanan Savri yesh yediyah l'chatzir. The Rabbanan hold know that there is a yediyah chatzir. Saif kol saif. He had a knowledge and awareness between the 2 letters. It breaks it up. It splits it up, and therefore it does not combine together. And therefore, he's potter. There's no chiyuv korban. So the way Taisus is learning Rabbi Gamliel is that even though there was a yediyah, he had a knowledge, and on top of that, there was a long lapse of time. One was in the morning and one was in the evening. Still, Rabbi Gamliel says, still, ein yediyah, he holds that ein yediyah l'chatzi shir, and still the 2 letters are combined together to be mechayvim for a korban. Hadron l'chaboyna, hadron l'chaboyna, hadron l'chaboyna. Perek Yud Gimel, Perek ha-oirek. Zok the Mishnah, Rabbi Elazar if he's at the beginning of the weaving process, he's just starting to weave the garment. So Rabbi Elazar says rather that the shiur, that the minimum amount to be mechayiv korban is 3 threads. And 1, if it's already a partially woven fabric, then over there, even 1 thread is choshev. If it's being added on to something that's already woven, even 1 thread is choshev, and it'll be a chayiv. That's the sheet of Rabbi Elazar. They say no, whether it's the beginning or the end, it's 2 chutim. Now Taisus says that when it says the end, it doesn't mean literally the end, because if it's the last thread on the garment, then even 1 thread would be chayiv. It means even if it's the beginning or the middle, even if it's not the beginning, if it's the middle or further on, the shiur is it's 2 chutim according to the Chachamim. Zog the Mishnah Vaito Eiser Shtei Batei Nirim. If a person makes 2 Batei Nirim, we'll explain that in a minute. Banirim, whether it's a Nirim, Bakiris, Benapa, Benapa, Bekavra, or Besal, whether it's in a sieve, different types of sieve, or in a basket, is chayiv. So what does this mean? So in the weaving process, the way weaving is conducted is, if you have the threads of the chassis, those are vertical threads, you pass the threads of the Arab back and forth. And that's how you weave. You back and forth, and that weaves. Now, in order to do it, it has to go in and out. It has to go in and out. So you have vertical threads. The horizontal one goes in, out, like a sewing process. And then you create the threads that are intertwined, are woven, intertwined, and interlocked with each other. Now, in order to do that weaving process, so there's different ways of doing it. One way is doing it with a frame, or another way is with rods. And you have to lift up 1 thread. So when the Arab thread passes through, it passes under and over. So this one has to be lifted. This one is lower down. So number 1 is up, 2 is down, 3 is up, 4 is down. And it goes up and down, over, under. Now, in order to lift up in a practical way, in an efficient way, to lift up the threads, the way it's done is that these threads are passed through loops. And so let's say in a case where there's a frame that has a loop. Thread number 1 is passed through 1 ring, and number 3 is passed to a different ring, and number 6 is passed through a different ring, or rather 5 is through a different ring. And so, therefore, when it passes through the rings, if you have a frame, you lift up those odd number, 135, you lift up the odd number of threads, you pass the thread of the Erev through, it goes over, under, over, under. Now, you want to pass it through the other way, you then want to raise up the even number of threads, so you have another frame that the threads of the chassis are passed through rings as well. It's the even number of threads that are passed through the rings. You lift those up, and then the reverse happens. So this one is over, and it goes this way, and it goes the other way. It goes over, under through the alternate threads, and that's the way the fabric is woven. That the threads pass through over, under. It comes back the other way, and it passes through the other threads the opposite. So, for instance, on this way, for example, it'll pass through on the under the number 1 over 2, and under 3 over 4. On the other way around, it'll go just the opposite. It'll pass up over the number 4, and then down, up that way. So you need to elevate the different threads of the chassis. You're either raising up the odd number ones and alternately the even ones. And that's the weaving process. You're raising it up, passing the thread through. Then this goes down. This one is up. These threads are elevated. You're passing through the other way. One way is doing it through frames. Another way is doing it through rods, where you have sticks, which is the same type of idea, which have threads hanging down with loops and are raising, and you raise up the odd number of threads and alternately the even number of threads. So if you make these two rings, these two botinirim, whether it's in benirim or a kiros or a sieve or a basket, more we'll discuss them more in detail, but whether it's in through a frame or through a rod system, or even when you make a sieve, by a sieve also, you have to have woven types of threads of metal or wood, which create that lattice so that the flower can pass through. Or when you have a wicker basket, you're also weaving. So it's also the same type of idea. Mishnah continues, V'atayfer state tfiras, if one sews 2 stitches, V'akarei almanas litvar state tfiras, or if he rips a garment in order to sew 2 stitches, the Gemara will explain. Zog the Gemara, he also V'yasvak Tanei Shtayim. He said that we learned that for oireg, the shear are 2 threads. Ay, vanan, tran, sholish. We learned in the Mishnah 3 threads. Like kasha, ha, ba'alimi, ha, bekatini. There's a difference if it is thick threads or thin threads. So it's the Mishnah, we said, Rabbi Lazar, is that when you begin the garment, starting the weaving, is 3. The Brisa taught that it's 2 threads. So more answers, there's a difference if the threads are thick threads or thin threads. Some say it in one way and some say it the other way. So which way is it 3 and which way is it 2? Some say in one way, alimi, if it's thick, if the threads are thick, if you need 3 threads in order to make sure it doesn't unravel, because since they're coarse, they're thick, they're gas, that they don't adhere to each other that well. You need 3 threads so that to make sure that they're not going to unravel. But trey, saucer, if you only have 2, they will unravel. Therefore, your potter on 2, you're only chayiv if there's 3. 3 is choshev, 2 is not. Ketini, but if they're thin threads, trey nami, loy silsri, even if they're 2, they won't unravel, so you're chayiv even for 2. That's one approach. So some say the other way. Ketini, if they're thin, so if they're thin, if you have 3 of them, it's choshev, it's noticeable, so you're chayiv. Trey lo yadia, but if it's only 2, it's not noticeable, it's not choshev. But alimi, if they're coarse, if they're thick, then trey nami yadia, even 2 will be noticeable, and even 2 are choshev, so you're chayiv even for 2. Tanya, we learn in the Brayso, if a person weaves 3 threads, one on already an existing piece of fabric, he adds one more to it, chayiv. But the Chum say no, whether it's the beginning or whether in the middle, the shear is 2 chutim. Ubasafa, if it's on the edge, if he's sewing a rim around the edge, shnei chutim beroichav shloisha batinirim. It's 2 threads, and even with a minimal width of even 2 batinirim, which is not normally the normal shear that we have is a roichav sit kofel, and or roichav sit or roichav sit kofel, depending on the shita. But it's the distance between the index finger and the middle finger. So it's a much wider width of it. So why over here is it even such a narrow width? Like if a person weaves a small belt, then it's shnei chutim b'roicha shleisha batinirim. For that type of a purpose, even a narrow width is chashav. Here also, when he's weaving a rim, that rim is not meant to be wide, and it's chashav as a rim and serves the purpose of an edge of a rim, even if it has that narrow width. So that it says that 3 to begin with, and 1 on an existing fabric, that's what the Brayso said in the opening statement. That's stomach Rabbi Elazar. That's going according to Rabbi Elazar. If one weaves 2 threads on an existing piece of cloth, vala imra, or on 2 threads on a border, chayiv. Rabbi Elazar imra afilu echad, he says even 1. That's the sheet. Rabbi Elazar sheet also. Ubesofa, if it's on the edge, if it's on the border, shnei chutim b'roicha shleisha batinirim. Like we said before, it's 2 threads with the width of shnei batinirim. So then, if he does shnei chutim b'roicha shleisha batinirim, is chayiv. Why is that chashuv? Because if it's like of a person, he weaves a small belt, then shnei chutim al roichav shloisha batinirim. It's not meant to be that wide, so it has a chashivas, even if it's narrow, even if it's al shloisha batinirim. Now, the opening statement of the Brayso is if it's 2, even on an existing fabric, he weaves 2 additional threads, Vala Imra, Chayev, that stomach, Kirabana, that says whether it's the beginning or whether it's the middle, the shear of 2 chutim. Oh, he says, Shtei batinirim. So the Mishnah says if he makes 2 batinirim, benirim, what does it mean when it says benirim? So this is, like we mentioned before, the system where you have rods, and you're raising the threads, the alternate threads by rods. So therefore you have the rod, you have threads coming down, and then if he makes, so there's the rod, there's threads coming down, which will be used to pick up the threads of the chassis. So he has the rod, threads coming down, it's looped around, twice around the thread of the chassis, and then back up onto the rod. So he has these threads coming down, these strings coming down, and he loops it around twice around the thread of the chassis, and then brings it back up over the rod. And if he does that twice, then he's chayiv. The kiros, my kiros. So Omarav, mitzvisa. Kiros is a mitzvisa. That is the system where you have the frames, like we mentioned before, where you have the frames and the threads pass through the frames, and you lift up the frames and the alternate threads that way. Or if he sews 2 stitches. So why does the Mishnah over here repeat it? We learned it already over there in Klal Gadol. And some more answers, because over here it says that he tears in order to sew 2 stitches. So so it says who sews. What do you mean by tearing? That's also mentioned in the Mishnah and Klal. So why does it have to be repeated? Ella, the Gemara answers Mishum to Geboil Misechet, because it says at the end, Hava Kareya B'chamos, meaning in the next Mishnah, it says Akareya B'chamos Val Mesa, that if a person rips and he tears in his anger or for his tsar, Rachman Aslan from Mes, Mishum Hachi, therefore Mishum Hachi Kitana Tevish Deitzviris, because over there it adds on this new halacha that if he teaches and that if he tears for Chamos Val Mesa, so over there, we're talking about tearing. It has to therefore we have to mention that if he is kaireya almanas tearing almanas lit for state fears, and since we mentioned that by tearing, we mentioned taifer, we mentioned by sewing. But kaireya almanas lit for state fears. So if he rips with the purpose, he's ripping the garment for the purpose of sewing 2 stitches. What is the case? More answers. The avda ki kisasa. When there's in the garment, it's not. There's a bubble. If there's a bubble in the garment, so what he would do is he would tear it, and then to stretch the garment, remove that bubble, and then resew it. After he pulls it apart and he stretches it to smoothen it, he would tear it, stretch it, smoothen it, and then resew it. So therefore, the kaireya, the tearing, is for a constructive purpose. It's for the purpose of beautifying the garment, and sewing 2 stitches will make it smooth and even, and therefore he's chayav for such a case.